Sweetwater Valley, December and 1842. 23 mountain men preparing for Wyoming winter, pitching standard canvas wedge tents in 2 hours flat. But third-season trapper James McAlister was still working, cutting prairie sod blocks with a camp axe, methodically stacking them against all 4 tent walls until his shelter disappeared, under what looked like a natural grass mound. His neighbors called him a fool. They called it a grave for winter. Then January 1843 arrived. 10 consecutive days below -20 degrees, 6 nights reaching -28, killing cold that froze water buckets 3 feet from roaring fires. Standard canvas tents failed. Men burned furniture to stay alive, interior temperatures dropping to -15 despite consuming 50 pounds of firewood daily. But McAlister's buried tent maintained 19 degrees with 0 firewood burn. What did this Norwegian-American understand about thermal mass that 2 centuries of proven mountain wisdom had completely missed? The morning of December 16th brought the kind of crystalline clarity that veteran trappers recognized as the calm before brutal weather. While his 22 companions completed their regulation tent setups and began the familiar ritual of wood gathering, James McAlister approached his shelter with the methodical precision of a craftsman executing a plan refined through generations of Norwegian survival wisdom. McAlister's canvas wedge tent stood identical to every other shelter in the Sweetwater Valley camp, 8 feet by 6 feet at the base, peaked at 5 feet height. Regulation Hudson's Bay Company specifications that had kept mountain men alive from the Great Lakes to the Pacific. But where others considered their work finished, McAlister was just beginning. He retrieved his sharpened camp axe and walked to the nearest stretch of undisturbed prairie, studying the ground with the practiced eye of someone who understood that not all sod was created equal. The art of cutting proper sod blocks required knowledge that frontier Americans had never needed to develop. McAlister's Norwegian grandfather had taught him to read prairie grass. The dense root systems of buffalo grass and blue grama created the strongest blocks, their fibrous networks holding soil together like natural rebar. Each cut had to preserve maximum root structure while achieving precise dimensions. McAlister's blocks measured exactly 18 inches long, 8 inches wide, and 6 inches thick, weighing 15 to 20 pounds when cut with roots and frozen earth intact. The cutting technique itself followed principles older than American settlement. McAlister drove his axe straight down, creating clean vertical cuts that preserved root systems, then sliced horizontally beneath each block to maintain the grass-soil matrix that provided both insulation and structural integrity. Modern building science would later validate what Norwegian fishermen had learned through necessity. Prairie sod with intact root systems contained 30 to 40% airspace, creating thousands of tiny insulation pockets superior to any manufactured material of the era. Big Sam Morrison paused in his firewood gathering to watch McAlister's peculiar ritual. The veteran mountain man had survived 11 Wyoming winters using Hudson's Bay methods, and he recognized potentially fatal experimentation when he saw it. Canvas tents worked because they allowed heat circulation and rapid setup, principles proven through decades of company experience. Morrison's skepticism carried the weight of institutional knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of men who had died learning what worked and what killed you in mountain country. Pierre Dubois joined the growing audience of puzzled observers as McAlister began the actual construction process. The French-Canadian voyageur had learned shelter techniques throughout the northern forests, where abundant deadfall timber made fuel conservation unnecessary. Dubois understood canvas tents, bark shelters, and lean-to construction, but this methodical burial of a perfectly functional tent violated every principle of frontier practicality he knew. McAlister laid his first course of sod blocks horizontally against the canvas wall, roots facing inward toward the tent fabric. This orientation was critical. The root systems needed to create insulating air pockets between the earth and the canvas, not compress against the exterior where they would conduct cold directly through the wall. The second course staggered like bricks, maintaining structural integrity while building the thermal barrier that would either save his life or kill him through carbon monoxide poisoning if his ventilation calculations proved wrong. Tom Bridger emerged from his own completed shelter setup to witness what was either genius or suicide in progress. The younger trapper kept meticulous records of everything: fuel consumption, temperature measurements, survival techniques that worked or failed. His practical mind immediately grasped the mathematical implications of McAlister's project. If the Norwegians' theory proved correct, the thermal performance would revolutionize cold weather survival. If wrong, they would find his frozen corpse inside a grass-covered tomb come spring. The third and final course of sod blocks brought the wall thickness to 18 inches, completely concealing McAlister's tent beneath what appeared to be a natural grass mound 4 feet high at the peak, sloping to ground level at the edges. Only the entrance remained visible, framed with salvaged wood to prevent cave-ins. The transformation was complete. A regulation canvas tent had become something resembling an ancient burial mound or primitive root cellar. McAlister's final construction details revealed the depth of his planning. He cut precise drainage trenches around the perimeter, understanding that spring snowmelt would flood any earth-sheltered structure without proper water management. 2 hollow reeds poked through the sod roof at carefully calculated angles, one for fresh air intake, one for exhaust, creating the ventilation system that would prevent carbon monoxide buildup while maintaining thermal efficiency. The mathematical principles underlying McAlister's construction would not be formally documented until modern building science emerged decades later. His 18-inch sod walls achieved an R value between 15 and 18, equivalent to modern fiberglass insulation. The dense earth provided thermal mass with high heat capacity, storing heat energy during warmer periods and releasing it gradually during extreme cold. Combined, these properties created a thermal battery system that could maintain livable temperatures using only body heat and occasional candles. As evening approached on December 18th, the contrast between conventional and innovative shelter became visible to anyone paying attention. Standard tent occupants fed roaring fires outside their canvas walls, burning 40 pounds of split wood through the night to maintain barely survivable interior temperatures around 15 degrees above zero. McAlister sat comfortably inside his buried tent reading by candlelight, the single flame providing adequate heat to maintain 28 degrees, comfortable enough for extended activity without heavy clothing. The betting among his fellow trappers had begun in earnest. Big Sam Morrison wagered McAlister would dig himself out within a week, admitting defeat to proven methods. Pierre Dubois predicted the Norwegian would suffocate from poor air circulation. Tom Bridger, ever the record keeper, simply noted the temperature differential and waited for the real test that veteran weather readers knew was approaching. The winter of 1843 would test every shelter system in the valley, separating functional innovation from potentially fatal experimentation. The signs began manifesting on January 2, 1843, in ways that required no formal meteorological training to interpret. Big Sam Morrison emerged from his canvas tent at dawn to find ice crystals forming in perfectly still air, a phenomenon that occurred only when Arctic air masses pushed south from Canada with unusual intensity. The particular quality of silence that accompanied these formations meant bird life had either fled or died, and the gray-white sky carried the distinctive color that veteran mountain men associated with temperatures approaching minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Morrison's weather predictions carried the authority of 11 successful Wyoming winters, and his announcement that morning carried undertones of genuine concern rather than routine caution. A real ball-buster of a cold snap was building, potentially reaching minus 20 or colder. The kind of sustained Arctic blast that killed unprepared men and tested even veteran survival systems to their absolute limits. The experienced trappers began calculating their firewood reserves with the grim mathematics of men whose lives depended on accurate fuel consumption estimates. The standard preparation protocol that followed Morrison's warning revealed the resource-intensive nature of canvas tent survival during extreme cold. Each regulation tent required 40 to 50 pounds of split wood daily to maintain interior temperatures barely above fatal hypothermia levels. Pierre Dubois and 2 companions spent January 3rd through 5th dragging dead timber to camp, calculating they would need 1,200 to 1,500 pounds of firewood per man to survive a severe cold snap lasting 1 full week. The physical labor was exhausting, but the alternative was death by freezing. Tom Bridger approached this preparation with his characteristic attention to mathematical precision, documenting every aspect of conventional cold weather survival for future reference. His calculations revealed the brutal efficiency requirements of canvas tent heating. Maintaining interior temperatures around 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit required continuous combustion of premium split wood, with fires that could never be allowed to die completely without risking fatal temperature drops within hours. The margin for error was non-existent. McAlister's preparation strategy during these same 3 critical days demonstrated either supreme confidence in his thermal calculations or suicidal overconfidence in untested Norwegian folk wisdom. While his neighbors accumulated massive firewood stockpiles through backbreaking labor, the third-season trapper focused on perfecting the technical details of his earth-sheltered system. He lined his small interior fire pit with carefully selected flat stones, creating a safe combustion chamber that could burn small amounts of wood without risking structural damage to his sod walls. The ventilation system that McAlister refined during this preparation period represented sophisticated engineering disguised as primitive construction. His 2 hollow reeds were positioned at precise angles calculated to create natural air circulation, fresh air entering through the lower intake reed heated by his body warmth and any small fire, then exhausting through the upper reed without creating dangerous backdrafts or carbon monoxide accumulation. The system required no moving parts or external power, operating purely through convection principles that Norwegian fishermen had perfected over centuries. McAlister's fuel calculations defied every principle of frontier heating that his neighbors understood and trusted. He estimated requiring only 2 to 3 pounds of wood daily, primarily for cooking rather than heating, with his body heat providing roughly 100 watts of continuous thermal energy equivalent to a bright electric bulb. His confidence in these numbers was either based on proven Scandinavian experience or represented dangerous delusion that would become evident when the killing cold arrived. The psychological pressure facing McAlister during this preparation period cannot be understated. Professional fur trappers were men whose livelihood and survival depended absolutely on proven techniques, and the frontier offered no second chances for fatal mistakes. Conventional wisdom carried the weight of institutional knowledge. Hudson's Bay Company methods had kept thousands of men alive across decades of mountain winters. McAlister was betting his life against this accumulated experience based on childhood memories of his Norwegian grandfather's turf house construction. Tom Bridger's skepticism during these preparation days reflected practical frontier logic rather than personal hostility toward innovation. When McAlister explained his thermal theory, that sod walls contained more insulating air pockets than honeycomb and functioned like wearing 6 buffalo coats around your entire body, Bridger responded with the mathematical reasoning that had kept him alive through multiple mountain winters. Moving air and large fires provided measurable, controllable heat that could be adjusted based on external conditions. McAlister's system offered no such flexibility or proven reliability. The professional stakes underlying this shelter experiment extended far beyond personal survival or frontier bragging rights. These men were commercial fur trappers whose families back east depended on their successful return each spring with marketable pelts and accumulated wages. A shelter failure meant not only death but financial disaster for wives and children who would receive no death benefits or insurance payments. The pressure to follow proven methods was enormous, making McAlister's deviation from standard practice appear professionally irresponsible as well as potentially suicidal. January 7th brought intensifying weather signs that transformed preparation into final desperate measures. Ice fog appeared in mountain valleys, an atmospheric phenomenon that occurred only when air temperatures dropped below -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Big Sam Morrison declared this the last opportunity for major firewood gathering before the killing cold arrived, and standard tent occupants responded with final frantic efforts to accumulate survival fuel supplies. The contrast in final preparations revealed the fundamental philosophical difference between conventional and innovative approaches to frontier survival. Morrison's camp now stockpiled 1,800 pounds of split wood per man, enough for 10 days of continuous burning at maximum consumption rates. McAlister possessed 30 pounds of mixed firewood and appeared suicidally underprepared by every conventional measure. His confidence suggested either access to superior knowledge or dangerous delusion that would be tested within hours. The evening of January 8th provided the final comparison before the real crisis began. Outside temperatures dropped to minus 12 degrees, cold enough to be dangerous, but not yet the killer cold that was approaching. Inside standard tents, men fed continuous fires burning 40-plus pounds of wood through the night, achieving interior temperatures barely above hypothermia levels. McAlister's buried tent maintained steady temperatures in the upper 20s, using no external fuel whatsoever, but the approaching Arctic blast would challenge every assumption about thermal performance that either system claimed to provide. The mercury in Big Sam Morrison's thermometer contracted to minus 28 degrees Fahrenheit at 4 o'clock on the morning of January 10, 1843, the coldest temperature ever documented in this section of Wyoming territory. Wind conditions pushed the effective temperature below minus 40 degrees, creating atmospheric conditions that could freeze exposed human flesh in under 10 minutes and transform standard winter clothing into inadequate decoration. This was not merely severe cold, but killing cold that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying every shelter system in the valley. Pierre Dubois discovered the limitations of conventional heating when his interior thermometer registered minus 15 degrees, despite maintaining a roaring fire that had consumed 53 pounds of premium split pine through the 14-hour night. His canvas tent walls, despite their proven track record across thousands of successful frontier winters, provided minimal thermal barrier against the extreme external conditions. The interior surfaces were covered with frost formations thick enough to scrape with a knife, and his water bucket had frozen solid just 3 feet from flames that were hot enough to singe his eyebrows. The physics of heat transfer through single-layer canvas became brutally apparent as external temperatures reached historic lows. Canvas fabric possessed an R value of approximately 1.0, meaning heat from interior fires escaped through the material almost instantaneously upon generation. The tent walls themselves became thermal bridges, conducting cold directly from the exterior air to interior surfaces and creating conditions where the only habitable space existed within the immediate radiant heat zone near active flames. Moving even 4 feet from a fire meant exposure to potentially fatal temperatures. Tom Bridger's meticulous record-keeping during this crisis documented the resource consumption required for marginal survival in extreme conditions. Through 14 hours of continuous fire maintenance, he burned 55 pounds of mixed hardwood and pine, achieving interior temperatures that fluctuated between minus 8 and minus 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Sleep became impossible because allowing the fire to diminish for even 1 hour would drop interior temperatures below minus 20 degrees, a condition that could prove fatal within hours of exposure. The physiological toll of this survival method extended beyond mere discomfort into dangerous health impacts that threatened long-term survival capability. Bridger's eyes burned continuously from wood smoke concentrated within the small tent space. His lungs ached from inhaling combustion fumes for extended periods, and the constant vigilance required for fire maintenance prevented the restorative sleep necessary for maintaining body temperature and immune system function. The survival method was consuming the men it was supposed to protect. McAlister's thermal reality inside his earth-sheltered tent defied every assumption that conventional frontier wisdom held about cold weather survival. His interior thermometer registered 19 degrees Fahrenheit, 47 degrees warmer than external conditions, and 34 degrees warmer than his neighbor's canvas shelters. He maintained this temperature differential using only his body heat, 1 wool blanket, and the occasional candle for reading light. No wood fires, no smoke inhalation, no sleep deprivation from constant fuel management. The scientific principles governing McAlister's success operated through thermal mass physics that would not be formally documented by building science for several more decades. The 18-inch sod walls functioned as a thermal battery system, absorbing heat energy during periods when interior temperatures rose above external conditions, such as when body heat and candles raised interior air to 35 degrees, and releasing this stored energy gradually during extreme cold periods. The dense earth in his root-bound blocks possessed high heat capacity, requiring enormous amounts of energy to change temperature significantly. The insulation properties of prairie sod exceeded any manufactured material available to frontier settlers in the 1840s. The grassroot systems created thousands of dead air pockets throughout the wall thickness, and dead air represented nature's most effective insulation medium. Modern testing would later confirm that McAlister's sod walls achieved R values between 15 and 18, comparable to contemporary fiberglass bat insulation and superior to any building material his neighbors could have obtained through normal frontier supply chains. The dramatic fuel consumption comparison revealed the efficiency difference between thermal mass systems and conventional heating approaches. While canvas tent occupants burned 50 to 55 pounds of wood daily just to achieve marginal survival temperatures, McAlister required 0 firewood for heating purposes and only 2 pounds daily for cooking meals. His earth-sheltered system operated at 96% greater fuel efficiency than standard canvas shelters while providing significantly superior interior comfort and safety conditions. The life-threatening nature of -15-degree interior temperatures became evident as the crisis extended beyond the first night. Human core body temperature maintenance becomes increasingly difficult as ambient temperatures approach zero, and prolonged exposure to sub-zero conditions triggers hypothermia, impaired cognitive function, and potentially fatal metabolic shutdown. Canvas tent occupants were surviving rather than living, existing in conditions that challenged basic physiological functions and threatened long-term health consequences. McAlister's 19-degree interior environment represented the difference between survival crisis and manageable discomfort. At temperatures approaching 20 degrees above zero, humans could maintain normal cognitive function, sleep adequately under appropriate bedding, and perform necessary daily activities without risking hypothermia or frostbite. The 34-degree temperature differential between conventional and innovative shelters translated directly into the difference between desperate survival and reasonable comfort during extreme weather conditions. The extended duration of the Arctic blast transformed the situation from temporary crisis into systematic disaster for conventional shelter systems. January 11th brought the second consecutive day of -26-degree temperatures, creating sustained cold exposure that exceeded the fuel supplies and physical endurance capabilities of standard canvas tent heating methods. Big Sam Morrison emerged from his shelter that morning, with bloodshot eyes from smoke exposure, persistent coughing from fume inhalation, and the grim calculation that his remaining firewood would last perhaps 4 more days at current consumption rates. McAlister's emergence from his earth-sheltered tent that same morning provided stark visual contrast to his neighbor's deteriorating condition. He appeared rested, clear-eyed, and comfortable, having slept soundly through the night without tending fires or inhaling combustion fumes. His fuel consumption remained at 0 pounds for heating, and his physical condition showed no deterioration from the extreme weather conditions that were systematically destroying the health and resources of every other man in the camp. The mathematical proof of his system's superiority was becoming undeniable, but the broader implications for frontier survival methodology would require additional days of crisis to become fully apparent to his skeptical neighbors. The temperature held at -25 degrees Fahrenheit for the third consecutive day on January 12th, transforming what had initially appeared to be a temporary weather crisis into a sustained Arctic siege that threatened the fundamental survival mathematics of the entire camp. This extended duration of extreme cold created resource depletion scenarios that conventional frontier heating methods could not sustain, forcing men to confront the brutal arithmetic of fuel consumption versus remaining winter duration with increasing desperation. Tom Bridger's precise documentation during this extended crisis revealed the catastrophic resource drain that standard canvas tent heating imposed during sustained extreme cold. His meticulous records showed interior tent temperatures averaging -12 degrees Fahrenheit after burning 49 pounds of prime split pine through a single night, while Pierre Dubois achieved -14 degrees after consuming 51 pounds of mixed hardwood. Meanwhile, McAlister's interior thermometer consistently registered 21 degrees with 0 wood consumption, maintained purely through the thermal battery effect of his sod walls storing and releasing body heat. The firewood shortage that emerged after 4 days of extreme cold consumption rates represented an existential crisis that threatened every conventional shelter in the camp. Big Sam Morrison's mathematical calculations, announced with the grim precision of a man facing death, revealed the unsustainable nature of their situation. At 50 pounds of fuel per day per man, his remaining wood supply would last 8 days maximum, but winter weather patterns suggested at least 6 more weeks before sustained warming could be expected. The arithmetic was simple and fatal. They would exhaust their fuel supplies long before environmental conditions permitted survival without artificial heating. McAlister's sustainable heating system during this same 4-day period demonstrated thermal efficiency that bordered on the miraculous by conventional frontier standards. His total wood consumption remained at 8 pounds, exclusively for cooking purposes, while his earth-sheltered tent maintained interior temperatures between 18 and 22 degrees through thermal mass alone. The sod walls continued absorbing heat during periods when his body warmth and occasional candles raised interior temperatures, then gradually releasing this stored thermal energy during the coldest external conditions. The technical superiority of thermal mass heating became increasingly apparent as the crisis extended beyond the initial emergency phase. McAlister's system operated like a natural battery, charging during warmer periods and discharging during extreme cold without requiring external fuel inputs or constant human attention. The dense earth in his prairie sod blocks possessed heat capacity equivalent to thousands of pounds of water, storing vast amounts of thermal energy that could be released gradually over extended periods without temperature fluctuations that characterized fire-dependent heating systems. Modern building science would later validate the efficiency principles that McAlister's Norwegian grandfather had understood through centuries of Scandinavian survival necessity. Earth-sheltered construction with proper thermal mass achieved performance equivalent to 21st century residential building codes, with his 18-inch sod walls providing insulation values comparable to contemporary fiberglass materials, while adding thermal storage capabilities that modern buildings achieved only through expensive specialized systems. The broader health implications of sustained extreme cold exposure began manifesting among conventional shelter occupants as the crisis entered its second week. Pierre Dubois showed signs of chronic smoke inhalation damage, persistent coughing, chest congestion, and reduced lung capacity that compromised his ability to perform the physical labor necessary for firewood gathering. Tom Bridger exhibited sleep deprivation symptoms from weeks of interrupted rest due to fire maintenance requirements, including impaired judgment and reduced reaction times that could prove fatal during outdoor activities. McAlister's sustained comfort during the same period allowed him to maintain normal sleep patterns, clear cognitive function, and full physical capability. His shelter required no nighttime maintenance, no smoke exposure, and no fuel anxiety that plagued his neighbors. He spent evening hours reading by candlelight, maintained normal daily routines, and preserved the mental alertness essential for making sound survival decisions during crisis conditions. The desperate measures that conventional shelter occupants adopted as their fuel supplies dwindled revealed the cascading failures that extreme cold imposed on standard frontier survival methods. Pierre Dubois began burning furniture, his wooden camp chair, spare tent poles, and eventually personal possessions with combustible value. These materials produced inferior heat output compared to properly seasoned firewood while generating dangerous smoke concentrations that further compromised interior air quality and respiratory health. Tom Bridger's increasingly dangerous foraging expeditions demonstrated how fuel shortages forced men into life-threatening risk calculations. He ventured progressively farther from camp-seeking deadfall timber, exposing himself to minus 25-degree air for extended periods while performing physically demanding labor that increased caloric requirements and frostbite risk. The spiral was becoming evident. Fuel shortages forced dangerous exposure that reduced physical capability while increasing energy demands that required additional fuel consumption. McAlister's recognition of his neighbor's deteriorating situation prompted him to offer assistance that demonstrated both the superiority of his system and his personal character. He invited Tom Bridger to share his earth-sheltered tent, creating a simple canvas partition that divided the interior space while maintaining thermal efficiency. With 2 occupants, the shelter easily maintained 18 to 20 degrees using only combined body heat, proving that the thermal mass system could accommodate increased heat loads without additional fuel requirements. The shared occupancy experiment provided Bridger with direct experience of thermal mass heating effectiveness that no amount of theoretical explanation could have conveyed. Inside McAlister's sod-walled shelter, he experienced stable temperatures, clean air, quiet rest, and zero fuel anxiety for the first time since the extreme cold began. The contrast with his previous canvas tent experience was so dramatic that it challenged his fundamental assumptions about frontier heating requirements and conventional survival wisdom. January 18th marked the 10th day of sustained extreme cold, creating conditions that had pushed the standard tent camp beyond crisis into systematic collapse. Big Sam Morrison's wood supply reached critical depletion levels, forcing impossible choices between immediate heating needs and longer-term survival requirements. His interior temperatures had dropped below -10 degrees despite burning increasingly poor-quality fuel that produced more smoke than usable heat, creating conditions that threatened immediate survival rather than mere discomfort. McAlister's earth-sheltered tent remained a stable refuge throughout this extended crisis, maintaining comfortable temperatures, clean air, and sustainable operation without consuming finite resources or requiring dangerous fuel-gathering expeditions. The mathematical superiority of his thermal mass system had been proven beyond any reasonable doubt, but the most dramatic vindication of his Norwegian grandfather's wisdom was still approaching as his neighbors faced the complete exhaustion of their conventional heating resources. January 20th, 1843, brought the absolute breaking point for conventional shelter systems when Big Sam Morrison's thermometer registered -22 degrees outside, while his tent interior, despite burning wet and increasingly inferior wood that produced choking smoke rather than usable heat, could achieve only -8 degrees. His carefully accumulated winter fuel supply had been exhausted after 10 days of extreme cold, forcing him to burn green timber, bark, and eventually pieces of leather equipment that created toxic fumes while providing minimal thermal output. The institutional wisdom of Hudson's Bay Company methods had reached complete systemic failure. Pierre Dubois collapsed inside his canvas shelter during the early morning hours, overcome by carbon monoxide poisoning from burning inappropriate materials in the desperate attempt to maintain survivable temperatures. His respiratory system, already compromised by weeks of smoke inhalation, could not process the toxic fumes generated by burning leather, wet wood, and furniture components. The voyageur who had survived countless northern winters using proven woodland techniques now faced death from the very heating methods that conventional frontier wisdom demanded. Tom Bridger's approach to McAlister's earth-sheltered tent carried the weight of a man whose pride had been systematically destroyed by mathematical reality. The practical frontiersman who had initially dismissed the Norwegian's buried tent as foolish experimentation now understood that his survival and Pierre's life depended on shelter technology he had mocked just weeks earlier. His request for help came without the swagger that typically characterized mountain man interactions, replaced by the humility of someone who had witnessed the complete failure of his trusted methods. McAlister's response demonstrated both the generosity of character and the practical capacity of thermal mass systems to accommodate emergency situations. Within the earth-sheltered tent, 3 men could be housed comfortably using only their combined body heat to maintain 22 degrees, still warmer than any conventional shelter achieved with massive fuel consumption. The sod wall's thermal battery effect easily absorbed and stored heat from 3 human occupants, each generating approximately 100 watts of continuous thermal energy. Pierre Dubois' recovery inside the earth-sheltered tent provided dramatic evidence of the shelter system's life-saving capabilities. Within 4 hours of being moved from his smoke-filled canvas tent to McAlister's clean air environment, the voyageur's coughing subsided. His skin color improved from the grayish pallor of carbon monoxide poisoning to normal flesh tones, and his core body temperature normalized without external heating sources. The contrast was so stark that it resembled resurrection rather than mere medical recovery. Tom Bridger's direct experience of thermal mass heating shattered every assumption he had held about frontier survival requirements. Inside McAlister's shelter, he discovered that warmth did not require constant fire maintenance. Clean air was achievable without smoke exposure, and comfortable rest was possible without fuel anxiety or midnight fire tending duties. The psychological relief of escaping the resource depletion spiral was as significant as the physical comfort of stable temperatures. The knowledge transfer that occurred during the 3-day shelter sharing period demonstrated how survival techniques spread through practical necessity rather than theoretical instruction. McAlister explained his construction methods with the patient detail of a craftsman teaching essential skills, emphasizing that sod blocks required roots facing inward to maximize insulating air pockets. Drainage trenches were critical to prevent spring flooding, and wooden door frames prevented structural collapse during freeze-thaw cycles. His grandfather's Norwegian techniques became American frontier knowledge through immediate survival necessity. February 1843 brought the first supply wagons to reach the Sweetwater Valley camp since the extreme cold crisis, and the traders who arrived carried more than goods. They transported news of McAlister's shelter innovation throughout the Rocky Mountain fur trade network. Mountain man Joseph Walker documented the technique in his journal with the precision of someone who recognized revolutionary survival technology when he witnessed it personally. His written description of the 18-inch sod wall system, complete with construction details and performance specifications, became the first formal documentation of thermal mass heating principles in American frontier literature. The June 1843 Rocky Mountain Rendezvous became the venue where McAlister's earth-sheltered tent technique achieved widespread adoption throughout the mountain man community. At least a dozen veteran trappers had experimented with sod wall variations by the summer gathering, each adapting the basic thermal mass principles to local conditions and available materials. Some used cut turf blocks, others constructed partial sod walls with canvas roofs, and a few built permanent winter camps featuring multiple earth-covered tents arranged for communal heating efficiency. Jim Bridger's professional endorsement at the Rendezvous carried the institutional weight necessary to transform individual innovation into accepted frontier practice. The legendary mountain man and fort builder examined McAlister's technique with the critical eye of someone whose reputation depended on recommending only proven survival methods. His declaration that any fool could freeze to death in canvas, but it took intelligence to live warm in properly constructed sod shelters, legitimized the technique throughout the Western fur trade. The evolution of McAlister's basic method demonstrated how effective innovations spread and adapt through practical application. By 1845, variations of earth-sheltered construction had prevented documented deaths during severe weather events from Wyoming Territory to Colorado and Montana. Military expeditions, early homesteaders, and trading parties adopted modified versions appropriate to their specific circumstances, creating a family of related techniques all based on thermal mass and superior insulation principles. McAlister's transition from fur trapping to permanent settlement in Oregon Territory allowed him to apply earth-sheltering principles to residential construction. His Willamette Valley farmhouse, completed in 1848, became the first documented earth-bermed home in the Pacific Northwest, featuring thick sod walls for thermal mass, minimal heating requirements, and superior interior climate control compared to conventional timber frame construction. Neighbors initially called it McAlister's Hobbit House, but quickly adopted similar methods when they experienced the dramatic fuel savings and comfort advantages. Modern building science validates every principle that McAlister applied through inherited Norwegian knowledge and frontier necessity. Contemporary earth-sheltered construction achieves identical thermal performance through the same combination of high R-value insulation and thermal mass systems that his prairie sod walls provided. Passive house design and earth-bermed buildings use mathematical principles that McAlister's grandfather understood through generations of survival experience rather than formal engineering education. Museum collections in Wyoming and Montana preserve actual examples of sod tent construction from the 1840s era, with interpretive displays crediting James McAlister's innovation with saving numerous lives during extreme weather events throughout the American West. Modern outdoor survival schools teach earth-sheltered construction techniques based directly on principles that McAlister proved in December 1842, when his willingness to be called a fool while applying superior knowledge transformed frontier survival methodology and saved lives across the Western Territories.